Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm John Corlett, President and Executive Director of the Center for Community Solutions. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Nancy J. Altman, co-founder of Social Security Works. Ms. Altman is here to deliver the Eugene H. Friedheim Lecture as part of the Center for Community Solutions 73rd Annual Human Services Institute. Eugene Friedheim was a prominent Cleveland attorney who, together with his wife Mina, was active in a number of Cleveland charitable organizations. He saw the Center for Community Solutions' role as a planner and community convener. This lecture fund was established by his family and friends to extend his humanitarian influence into the future. We are pleased today to be joined by his son, Dr. Don Friedheim, and Don's wife, Gerda. So please join me in recognizing them and the contributions made by the Friedheim family to Cleveland's future. On August 14, 1935, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act into law. Since that time, almost 80 years ago, few more issues have become more contentious in American domestic politics than Social Security. Whether you believe the system is a Ponzi scheme or are one day expecting to collect benefits or are currently collecting benefits, Social Security has huge ramifications for everyone. Echoing the Constitution, President Roosevelt believed in the sweeping effects of the act and its ability to, quote, provide for the general welfare of Americans by providing financial protections to the elderly, blind, and disabled. Our speaker today will share with us how the Social Security Act has not only exceeded President Roosevelt's intended goals, but how future generations can benefit, how future expansion can benefit Americans today and for generations to come. Ms. Altman is co-director of Social Security Works, which she co-founded with Eric Kingston in 2010, and co-chair of the Strengthen Social Security Coalition and Campaign. She is also author of The Battle for Social Security, From FDR's Vision to Bush's Gamble, and co-author of Social Security Works, Why Social Security Isn't Going Broke and How Expanding It Will Help Us All. She has a 40-year background in areas of Social Security and private pensions, having served on the faculty of Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government and assisted with development of Social Security issues and amendments under both Alan Greenspan and Senator John Danforth. She has a degree from Harvard University and a law degree from the University of Pennsylvania Law School. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club, join me in welcoming Nancy J. Altman.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Thank you to the City Club for hosting me here, and thank you everyone who's here and everyone listening and watching. The timing of today's talk couldn't be more perfect. Yesterday marked the 50th anniversary of the enactment of Medicare and Medicaid, and as John said, on August 14th, in 2 weeks, we will mark the 80th anniversary of Social Security. Now, some people say 80 years, isn't it time to modernize this program? The reality is that the concept behind Social Security is thoroughly modern. The idea is that as long as most people are dependent on wages to provide their basic needs, you need insurance against the loss of those wages. You can become disabled and not able to work anymore. And you need insurance in that you need disability insurance. You can die leaving young children. You need life insurance. You can be fortunate and live to 105, and you need insurance for retirement that you cannot outlive. And you can lose your job, and you need unemployment insurance. Now, interestingly, what we call Social Security today provides disability insurance, life insurance, and old age annuities. In the original Social Security Act of 1935 was unemployment insurance. We don't normally call it Social Security today, but it's part of that same concept. And the interesting thing about Social Security is that, as you know, that our nation is very polarized. I mean, here we are in Ohio, a swing state, and we see the red states and blue states, and everybody wants your votes. Social Security is an issue that's been poll tested starting back in the 1930s with the Gallup. The conservatives have tested it. Liberals, we do our own polling. Every poll comes out the same way. and that is Americans are overwhelmingly united in their support for Social Security, and indeed in their feeling that it's more important than ever. I mean, we've asked in our polling, are you self-identified as a Tea Partier? Are you a union member? Are you Republican? Are you conservative? Democrat? Are you independent? All ages, all men, women, people of color, everyone. The numbers come out, and they are off the charts. It's like 80% of the American people. And I think the reason that it is so widely appreciated and supported are for a couple reasons. One is that it represents basic American values. Everyone contributes, minimum wage worker or a millionaire, whoever it is, your first dollar of earnings, you contribute to Social Security. And it rewards hard work. The more you contribute, the larger the benefit you get. But it also has a fair distribution, so it understands that if you've had a lifetime of low earnings, you have less discretionary income, less ability to save, and therefore you have, the formula is very clever in that you get a larger dollar amount if you've contributed more, but if you're low income, you get a higher proportionate amount. It also is very prudent and responsible in its financing. It can only pay benefits if it has sufficient income to cover the costs. It has no borrowing authority. And indeed, every year, starting back in 1941, the first monthly benefits were paid in 1940. And every year, starting in 1941, whether wartime, peacetime, depression, whatever, there is an annual report of the trustees. The money is kept in trust and paid to, and there's an annual report to Congress. The most recent one was just July 22nd, and I will talk about that in a minute. It protects families, it's universal, it's this concept that we're all in it together. It is, I could go on and on, but you get the point that it's basic American moral religious values that underlie this program. And as I say, it protects against a basic economic insecurity that can affect any of us. Any of us can walk out in the street and, God forbid, get hit by a truck and not able to work again. Any of us can die prematurely, and we all hope to live to a very long old age. And indeed, because it does this, and you can see it, 2/3 of seniors receive half or more of their income from Social Security. Without Social Security lifts 22 million Americans, including 1 million children, out of poverty each year, because one thing that's not well understood is Social Security is the nation's largest children's program, because as I say, it is this family protection. Prior to enactment, every state but New Mexico had poorhouses. And as I say, it has transformed the nation. Those poorhouses were mainly older people who had been independent all their lives. Generally, when people couldn't work anymore or retired, they moved in with their children. But if you didn't have children or your children couldn't take them in, you literally went to the poorhouse. There were many children in orphanages who had a live parent, but who couldn't, after the death of one parent, couldn't continue to support them. So let me give you what I think is a perfect metaphor for how Social Security has transformed the nation. How many of you have played Monopoly? Just raise your hand. Oh, good, everyone. Picture the Monopoly board. The original Monopoly board, the game was created back in 1908. The original Monopoly board had a space called the poorhouse, where if you threw the wrong number, you wound up in the poorhouse. Guess what the space is today? Free parking. We have gone, and that is the truth, that is exactly the space. We have gone from a period when people dreaded getting old to one, hey, free parking. And that is an example. The President Roosevelt, and I think his signing statement is online, and I think you've been using it, he talked about it is a structure intended to lessen the force of possible future depressions. And indeed, if you think about our recent recession, which many in 2008, that many people talked about as a depression. One major difference was in the 1930s, when we had 1/3 unemployment. Hidden in the shadows were two other generations, children and seniors, because so many people lived with their children. Today, people lost money in their 401ks, they lost houses, all kinds of things, but Social Security's guaranteed income kept being paid and indeed helped many families where younger members were unemployed. So it works extremely well. It is our most universal form of retirement income. It's extremely efficient. It pays more than 99 cents of every dollar in benefits. Less than 1% of Social Security's money is paid for administrative costs. Now, with 401ks, we're still trying to get, Department of Labor is trying to get some regs to show so people will even know what the administrative costs are, because there's so many hidden fees. Private insurance has much higher administrative rates. So it's a very efficient, it's universal, it's very secure, it's backed by the government, it's portable from job to job. It really works. And importantly, and I can go into this in questions, but it is one thing that's people don't understand often. They often equate, and I've been doing it somewhat myself, 401ks and Social Security. But the difference is that what you need for the kinds of risks that Social Security protects is not savings, but insurance. If it's a contingent risk like dying prematurely, you don't have a savings account, you buy life insurance. And the same thing, people get confused because we all hope to live to old age, and most of us do. But when you're starting out, you don't know how long you're going to live, you don't know if you're going to have periods of unemployment. There are all kinds of risks that actuaries can figure out for groups, but you don't know yourself. Hey, am I going to live to 57 or am I going to live to 105? That is unpredictable. You need insurance. The major shortcoming of Social Security is that its benefits are too low. Economists and generally say that people need about 70 or 80% of their pre-retirement wages to maintain their standards of living in retirement, which is the goal of retirement income. Social Security for average workers, someone making $40,000, it only replaces about 40%. And the average benefit is about $16,000 a year for retired workers. It's lower if you average in people with disabilities, if you average in survivors. It's more like $13,000 or $14,000 a year. So the benefits are too low. It also could cover other risks that we don't now cover. There are what people generally call short-term disability, such as sick pay, when there's times when you have to grab some water. When you take time away from work and you need your wages replaced. Caregiving often falls on women, taking time out for elderly relatives, sick relatives, children. That is another kind of risk Social Security could protect. It's, as I say, extremely efficient, works very well. The question is, can we afford it? I mean, can we even afford the current program, much less all these expansions I'm talking about? The answer is absolutely yes. Social Security, as I say, the trustees report just came out. Social Security currently costs about 5% of our gross domestic product. At its most, in 2035, when the baby boomers are all 70 or older, it will cost 6%. So we're talking about 1% more. And then at the end of the century, it goes down a little bit, and then at the end of the century, it's also a little bit around 6%. The shortfall, according to the trustees, is 0.9%. And to put that number into perspective, after 9/11, our military spending has gone up 1.1% of GDP, and we're talking about 0.9%. Indeed, when the baby boomers started school, public education in the nation between 1950 and 1975 went up 2.8%. And we are obviously a much wealthier nation than we were then, and we are projected to be wealthier in the future. Too long, Social Security has been called in crisis or even just a problem. The reality is that Social Security is a solution. Current seniors, there's a lot of sometimes loose talk that, oh, they're all, in gated. Former Senator Alan Simpson would talk about them all in gated communities driving Lexus and so forth. That just isn't true. Most seniors are just above the poverty line. 75% of seniors have incomes of less than $50,000. They are just one economic shock away from being in very serious shape. And of course, a lot of these numbers are just snapshots. So somebody who's fine at 70 may not be fine at 85 when a serious illness has happened, when a spouse has died, and so forth. And unfortunately, tomorrow's seniors are likely to be in worse shape. We've had a history of private sector defined benefit plans, which are disappearing and being replaced by these do-it-yourself 401ks. We've lost home equity. And we've had stagnant wages for a very long time. There's been an increasing squeeze on middle-class families. And as everyone who follows the news knows, and in fact just lives in our country knows, that there has been rising income inequality. And that didn't just happen by accident. It was government policies that have distributed much of our wealth upward, so that most of our wealth over the last 25 years has gone to the top 1%. Well, the last time we had this kind of income inequality was back in the Roaring '20s. And what did we do then? We enacted Social Security. We enacted a minimum wage. We enacted National Labor Relations Act, which allowed unions to people to unionize. And so the answer to today's income inequality are the same thing. They include expanding Social Security. As I say, if there's one thing I want you to, a mantra, it's Social Security is not a problem, it's a solution. Now, fortunately, the conversation is starting to catch up with the reality. For the last few election cycles, for the last 20 years, in fact, there was this conventional wisdom, this dominant sense, as I say, that the program is in crisis. And the talk in Washington was, look, everybody knows we've got to cut Social Security. The question is, how do we do it given its popularity? Tom Brokaw, in the 2008 presidential debate, called Social Security a ticking time bomb that was about to explode. Fortunately, the conversation is becoming more balanced, thanks to a number of policymakers, including, you should be very proud of Senator Sherrod Brown, who's been a real champion on this issue. Members are talking about expanding Social Security. In fact, this winter, Elizabeth Warren introduced a resolution in the Senate, and 43 senators voted to expand Social Security. There are a number of bills that have been introduced. Senator Sanders, of course, running for president, is a strong supporter of expanding Social Security. In the House, we have 115 Democratic House members who have either signed bills or come out for expanding Social Security. So we're beginning to have a balanced conversation. It's no longer this kind of whispered, everybody knows, how are we going to cut this program? It's, what do we do? This is not a question you'll sometimes hear, oh, this is just mathematics, it's demographics, it's a demographic tsunami. the reality is, as I went through those numbers about GDP, it's a question of values. It's a question of priorities. It's a choice that we should be making collectively. How much do we want to spend publicly through Social Security? And do we expand it? Do we keep the benefits the level they are and fully fund them? Or do we cut it back? And as I say, the conversation is shifting. You have Chris Christie and Jeb Bush and others. Jeb Bush talked about phasing out Medicare. He's talked about raising the retirement age. Chris Christie has talked about means testing Social Security. Scott Walker, others on that side are saying that. And on the Democratic side, you've got Martin O'Malley, you have Bernie Sanders, who are talking about expanding Social Security, and Hillary Clinton, in a recent economic talk, mentioned enhancing Social Security, which I think is just a euphemism. She was being a little bit more cautious, but it's the same basic idea. And the conversation is shifting just in time, because I just flew in from Washington yesterday, and let me tell you what's happening there. There is Social Security, as I said, is the funds are kept in trust, and money can only be spent, the benefits can only be paid, and the associated administrative costs, if there is sufficient income to cover the costs. Currently, according to the latest trustees report, even if Congress did nothing whatsoever, benefits could be paid fully through 2034 on all the benefits, and then 75% thereafter. But there is a kind of a technicality, and that is there are two trust funds. Even though the benefits are all integrated, there are two trust funds. One is the Old Age Survivors Trust Fund that was created in the 1930s. The other is the Disability Insurance Trust Fund that was created in 1956. Now, as you know, 6.2% of your wages get deducted for Social Security contributions and sent to Washington, and that's the last, or your employer takes, that's the last you know of it, gets sent to Washington. In Washington, the funds get divided into these two trust funds. Now, from time to time, you have to rebalance the same way you have to rebalance stocks and bonds. And generally, it's been done 11 times in the past. There's nothing nefarious or anything about it. But the problem is, you'd think in a well-run government that the trustees would have that ability to just rebalance. But it takes an act of Congress. And as I said, it's been done 11 times in the past without, on a bipartisan basis. But this time, on the very first day of this congressional session, the House Republicans adopted a rule, literally snuck it in. We all found out about it at 6 in the morning. It was being voted on that day. That said, not this time. We're holding this hostage to a broader kind of reform. Now, that rebalancing has to be done, according to the trustees' report, before the end of 2016. So the danger is this will all happen after the election in the lame duck of 2016. And there'll be people voting on it who may have been thrown out of office. Who knows what will happen? So it makes this election extremely important. There's a lot of talk. You're going to hear a lot. You know, every so often you'll hear something in the paper. There is some effort to get this done now, but Congress, as you know, usually waits until the last, the 11th hour to do it. But in this case, it's really a disservice because people with disabilities depend even heavier on these benefits than seniors depend on Social Security. They are just, most of them, just getting by. And they will start reading stories in the paper that if Congress doesn't act, their benefits will be cut by 19%. The acting commissioner of Social Security testified and said a 19% cut to most people with disabilities would be, these are her words, would be a death sentence. So it's really, I'm glad to be here because my important message and sort of the takeaway of all of this is that the people in Washington, our elected officials work for us. We don't work for them. And we should make sure that they do what we want. Now, there's a disconnect, and as I say, there are a lot of hot-button issues where the American people are divided, but this is not one of them. So supporters of Social Security should be absolutely sure to make sure this election that the people they vote for share their values about this vital program. In the last few elections, everybody's been for saving the program and a bipartisan solution. And when you say that, you go, okay, everybody sounds the same. There's no difference. Who am I going to vote for? This time, because the conversation has gotten more balanced, if you're at town hall meetings, if you get the chance at a forum like this, the question is, are you for expanding Social Security? Are you for fully funding the current benefits? Are you for cutting it? And are you for ensuring that the disability insurance part of Social Security continues to pay benefits and is equalized with the other programs? Now, as I said, August 14th, 1935, President Roosevelt signed Social Security into law. He talked about it as a cornerstone, and by no means finished, but a cornerstone on which to build a structure. And if you look at your Social Security cards, you see those pillars, and that's the idea that this is a strong foundation of economic security for the American people. So in 1935, the retirement benefits were enacted. In 1939, the life insurance protection was added. In 1956, disability insurance was added. In 1965, Medicare was added as part of Social Security because people understood that you could never really have economic security if you're one illness away from bankruptcy. So Medicare was enacted. And in 1972, Medicare was extended beyond seniors to also cover people with disabilities. And it was also the automatic cost of living adjustments were added because without them, you live 10, 20 years. If those benefits are not adjusted for inflation, they erode over time. But since 1972, although we've become wealthier and wealthier as a nation, notwithstanding the increases have not been equally distributed, but we have become wealthier and wealthier as a nation, but we have not expanded these vital programs. So there's a kind of pay it forward. We are the beneficiaries of people who were smart enough back in 1935 and 1939, 1956, 1965, 1972 to build the programs for what they are today. Now it's our turn to make sure that our children and our grandchildren will have these programs even stronger in the future. Thank you.
Today we are enjoying a Friday forum featuring Nancy J. Altman, co-founder of Social Security Works. We encourage you to organize your questions for our speaker now and remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point. If you are joining us via our live broadcast on WCPN or our webcast and would like to tweet a question, you can tweet it at the City Club. We welcome all of you here and those joining us via radio broadcast and web stream provided by our primary media partner, 90.3 WCPN, WVIZ PBS, and 104.9 WCLV, Idea Stream, or one of the many radio stations across the region and country that carry our City Club programs. Television, radio, and web production and distribution is made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Please be sure to join us this Friday, August 7th, as we welcome Democratic National Committee Chair, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, for a discussion on what's at stake in the 2016 presidential election. For more information about upcoming and past forums, please visit us online. We're at cityclub.org. Today, we welcome guests at tables hosted by AARP Ohio, the Benjamin Rose Institute on Aging, and the Center for Community Solutions. We thank you all for your support. Now it's time to return to Nancy Altman for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome guests from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphones today, our content associate, Teddy Eisenberg, and Director of Programming, Stephanie Jansky. First question, please.
Ms. Altman, Social Security was never part of the government's budget until the Vietnam War, when Lyndon Johnson, in an attempt to mask the deficit that was being created, threw the excess from Social Security into the national budget. So we've never gotten a straight story as to what it is. However, when you say today that Social Security can continue to pay benefits up until 2034, that presupposes that Social Security is actually going to collect on the so-called trust funds, which are nothing more than IOUs from the U.S. Treasury. And when they start to cash in those bonds, the government's going to have to come up with the cash from some source. So my practical question to you, over the next 10 years, how much are we talking about, and how would you fund that cash? Would you borrow more money, or what taxes would you raise to provide them?
Excellent question. And if I can, I will answer your specific question, but your lead up to the question was fantastic, and I'd like to comment on that as well, if I might. And that is, you are exactly right on your history, and that is that prior to, I think it was 1968, but prior to Lyndon Johnson, Social Security was, in Washington parlance, off budget. It was its own separate trust fund, segregated, separate and apart from the general operating fund of the United States. And that's exactly what the United States requires private employers to do. Their private pension trusts are separate and apart from their general operating fund. Now that remains the case, and that was never changed. But what happened for a short period was something called the unified budget. And that was this idea, well, it's all money coming into the government, all money going out, and so, let's just look at the overall numbers. Well, the problem is that's fine for an economic analysis if you want to look at macroeconomic effects, but that's not what the law says. The law says that this money is dedicated, the contributions to Social Security are dedicated to Social Security and cannot be spent for other kinds of expenditures. And so I was Alan Greenspan's assistant on that 1982-83 commission, and one of our recommendations, which was accepted by Congress, was to once again remove Social Security from the unified budget. And it is not part of the unified budget, but for some reason it is always talked about in the media, and it is always reported by CBO as unified. So that is, and it gets into that. We, during the all of these deficit fights, insisted strongly, because it's accurate, that Social Security does not add a penny to the deficit. It has no borrowing authority. So that, and that has won the day, and Social Security was not cut as part of these deficit deals. Now, on your specific question, you're right. What happens, Social Security is primarily current funded, which is why it can pay 75 cents on the dollar, even in 2080 or 2090, because people are still paying, working, and contributing, and it's current funded. But any year, starting back in 1935, or when it first started being collected, 37, whenever there's been a surplus, the money's been invested. As I mentioned, it's basic American values, and the Americans like prudent, conservative investing. And so rather than have a diversified portfolio, Congress said the money had to be invested in the safest investment on earth, Treasury bonds backed by the full faith and credit of the United States. Now, that fund is now $2.8 trillion. It was mainly advance funded in the 1990s by the baby boomers. And Congress has a choice. It can now have a partially funded system and bring in enough revenue so that that money doesn't have to be drawn down, or it can draw the money down, and so forth. But the question is, and this really gets to your specific question, and that is, The United States now has outstanding debt of about $17 trillion. This fall, they're going to have to raise the debt limit to make it larger. $2.8 trillion of that $17 trillion is money owed to the Social Security trust funds. It's exactly the same as a bond that you would buy or that China would buy. And so the question is, Congress, if China sells one of its bonds, or I sell one of my bonds, they have a choice. They have less revenue. They can either raise taxes, they can cut spending, or they can borrow from someone else. And that's exactly the situation that Congress will be in if they decide that Social Security will start drawing down its reserve. So it's $2.8 trillion that will be drawn down over the next 19 years. So Congress should act sooner rather than later, but it should act responsibly and do the right thing, and that is expand Social Security, which is the goal of the program, and we can talk about solutions, but a lot of people think the very wealthiest among us who've benefited so much should pay a larger share. So that was a very long question for answer to, I apologize, but you pushed a lot of buttons.
Could part of the solution be there might be as many as 11 million undocumented immigrants working in the United States now under the table? If we were to have immigration reform and somehow or other these people were allowed to stay here and pay taxes, do you think that would be a positive thing along the lines of what you were talking?
Well, in fact, that question was posed to the actuaries of the Social Security Administration, and they found that it would be a very big help to Social Security, that it would bring in, and I've forgotten, to be honest, exactly how much of the shortfall, because there is a projected shortfall, how much of the shortfall it would take into account. But part of that is these are just projections. So if we increased legal immigration, if we brought people, undocumented workers, out of the black market paying in, it would be very positive. In fact, today, undocumented workers, contribute about $5 billion every year to Social Security and get zero out of it because they are undocumented. So for lots of reasons, it's a good policy.
Ms. Altman, thank you so much for joining us at the City Club. I'll take a little while here so that you can drink some water. I'm just curious about why this is such a passion of yours. It is such a sort of niche in terms of all of the work that government does, and you have a nonprofit associated with this. You have 2 books making the case, and you don't seem to be ready to start drawing on Social Security. So why exactly is this, the personal story really is what I'm interested in.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for that question. As I mentioned, I was Alan Greenspan's assistant in 1982. I had the great fortune of meeting 3 men. 2 of them started working on Social Security in 1934, the year before it was enacted. The third was a latecomer. He started in 1939. One of them was they're all now unfortunately gone, but one of them was Wilbur Cohen, who rose to be, I'm going to take another sip. Yeah, I knew my voice, the summer cold. So bear with me. I'm going to take a cough drop here. But let me focus on that for a minute. 3 men who just died within the last, that I was privileged to meet when I was young, who were young men at the start. Wilbur Cohen was the assistant to the person who chaired the group that put together the legislation. And rose to be Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare under Lyndon Johnson. Another was Bob Myers, the longest-serving chief actuary of Social Security. He also started in 1934 crunching the numbers and was very proud of the fact that they accurately predicted within 0.1% what percentage of the population would be over 65 in year 2000. They projected that in 1934, and they were within 0.1%. The third was Robert Ball, who rose from the lowest level. He started in a field office and worked his way up and was the longest serving commissioner of Social Security. Now, they talked about the people they knew when they were young as giants in the field. But of course, I and my colleagues, and in fact, my co-author on Social Security Works was also part of, he was also on the staff of the Greenspan Commission, and we saw them as the giants. And so in some ways, I see this as a legacy. It's gone, and I'm very pleased that our organization, Social Security Works, I'm now the age they were when I first met them, but our executive director is 31. Our communications director is 24. And we have, in fact, a staff of 8 people, and everyone is in their 20s or early 30s. And I see them as the future of Social Security. So that's where my passion comes from. I feel that, another thing about Bob Ball, his father had been a Methodist minister and was part of this idea of an active ministry, but he considered himself an atheist. He was not interested. But to me, he really had a calling, and it was Social Security. And tearing up, I see myself following in his footsteps.
Coming to the City Club today, but I'm somewhat of a doubting Thomas.
Good.
You began in your speech by saying Social Security is collected from W-2s and 6% sent away. I attended a very interesting lecture here about the future economy and how we're going to work. W-2s is not going to be the future, according to these people. It's going to be people who are self-employed, setting up businesses clandestinely. Clandestine businesses do not pay Social Security. In theory, they're supposed to, but the reality is the nitty-gritty. How are you going to capture all that money that's not going to be W-2, that's not going to have a paper trail, and that's going to become more and more of the future generations? Like I taught my great-granddaughter when they cut my hair, I said, Anaya, what's it going to cost me? She said, $10. When they finished, I put 2 $5 bills down there. And Anaya says to me, no, Grandpa, it's $10 each. I said, Anaya, you didn't say $10 each. You said $10. There's your $10. What you pay your help got nothing to do with me. I'm a bottom line person. How is it going to be captured? How is the money going to get into the pot so that it can be redistributed out? Theory is nice. Practicality is a reality.
Well, thank you. And just to be clear, if you're employed, you pay 6.2% up to a maximum of $118,000, and your employer matches dollar for dollar. If you're self-employed, you're responsible to pay 12.4% up to that $118,000. Now, you're right, there are enforcement issues, there are temporary workers, there are all kinds of things, but then they're also not paying their income tax if they're not paying their FICA contributions. So the question is, if you're envisioning a world where people aren't paying income tax, people aren't paying FICA, we've got Social Security is it strikes me as the smallest part of that problem. We don't have money to fund our government. Now, it may be that we will transfer over to more of a sales tax, or, I can't project the future of overall tax policy, but I don't think there's any harder ability to collect Social Security contributions than any other kind of tax that we have. And my guess is that in the future, my own sense is we still will have plenty of people who are employees.
Ms. Altman, over here.
Oh.
No, wait until you have the microphone. Just wait. There's a tension in Social Security between its almost revered status as a program that affects everybody. And the reality that you've described, that it's of special value to people who don't have as many other assets and means, people in the socioeconomic class of greater need. Going forward, if we are to be convinced by your argument that it's time to expand the benefits, those additional dollars have to come from somewhere. Is it envisioned in your strategy that they would come evenly from all classes, or would they come disproportionately from the more well-to-do? In other words, is your rallying cry spread the wealth or simply make the program bigger?
Excellent question. Now, and let me say about who benefits most from Social Security. The idea of it is, as I say, it's insurance and it's basic foundational economic protection. So there was a man named Neil Friedman who had many $million of dollars, and he made one mistake. He invested it with Bernie Madoff, and he lost all of it. And today he is living solely on Social Security. So it's like becoming disabled. There are things that can happen to you that you can't predict, and this is a sort of this basic level. I would love if the conversation in Washington were, let's expand the benefits, let's distribute them fairly, and what's the most fair, reasonable way to pay for the expansion? And there are lots of different ways you can do it. Private employers usually pay 100% of the cost of defined benefit plans. Social Security, again, it's this conservative feature that each employee puts in half the amount. So you could have employers pay a larger share than employees. You could have a new form of dedicated revenue. Some people have talked about the estate tax. You could, and I think a lot of the thinking in Washington is that over the last 30 years, there's been stagnant wages and disproportionate, all of the income growth. There's been plenty of income growth, but it's all gone to the top. That's the first place we should look for more. And I have my own personal views, but I would love the day if that were the debate in Washington. I think we could find a reasonable meeting of the minds on that.
You mentioned the fact that in 2034, only 75% of the benefits can be paid. But we can solve that problem very easily if we lift the cap, which is now, as you mentioned, $118,000 a year. We could lift the cap in increments, or we could scrap the cap altogether, and we would never, ever have to worry about the Social Security again.
And I think you're right. Let me make a point, though, about that 2034. And that is, mainly in budgeting, programs, especially at the federal level, are projected out 5 or 10 years. Social Security is completely balanced for the next 10 years. For the next 25 years, it's 95% balanced. It has enough funds for it's 95% funded. For the next 50 years, it's 88% funded. Whenever you make these long-range projections, and you're making projections about what's the fertility rate going to be in 2030, what's immigration going to be in 2030, we have to have a common set of a baseline, and the actuaries do as good a job as anyone in making these projections. But the further out you go, the harder it is to project. So Congress enacted a law because they were concerned about multi-employer plans, a kind of private pension arrangement. And they put in every year the plans had to say whether the actuaries had to say whether they were in the green zone, the yellow zone, or the red zone. You can imagine what that means. Green zone is they're fine. Yellow zone, there's a warning, but they've got a little bit of time to address it. Red zone is crisis. By those very standards, Social Security is in the green zone. So this is way out in the future. But as to your specific point of the one way to bring more revenue in, that is getting increasing traction in Washington, the idea that everyone should pay the same rate. Now, People making 118,000 pay 6.2%. People who make twice that rate are only paying 3.1% on their total income. So virtually every proposal in Congress has that as a solution. And what Senator Sanders says is most people only have wage income, and so it should be on all income. And that, you're right, would make sure there would be plenty of money, not just to keep Social Security able to pay as far as we can project, but we could expand benefits and pay for them as well.
Yes, there are two major ways to actuarially make it actuarially sound for 75 years. One is the way that we've just been talking about, and that's to lift the cap on FICA more progressively than we have. The other way is to extend the retirement age from now going on to 67 to 70. That might be okay for white-collar workers, but obviously it would affect blue-collar workers who have worked with their bodies for their whole lifetime much more. Can you suggest what balance of these two ways you would recommend?
Yeah, let me be very, very clear about this. Social Security, Social Security has a range of ages. You can retire as early as 62. And for every month you delay, you get a little bit more because you're getting it for 1 month shorter time, up to age 70. So because of the way the formula works, and it's kind of complicated, but actually we talk about it a lot in our book, that that raising the retirement age a single year is mathematically indistinguishable from a 6% across-the-board benefit cut. Everybody, low income, high income, 6%. And you've raised additional concerns with raising the retirement age. This disproportionately affects people who are, that the very high end, their life expectancies are increasing, but for people in the lower income, their life expectancies have actually declined. But the bottom line is, I think Social Security's benefits are too low. I think our goal is, what level of economic security do we want as a nation to provide ourselves through this program? And then the second question, the means to an end, is then how do we fairly fund it? We're certainly wealthy enough to do it. As I say, it's a matter of values. So my personal values would be scrap the cap should be the first thing. We have a plan in our book. We actually have a millionaire's tax that we dedicate, and I would fight as hard as I could, and our whole coalition would, against raising the retirement age.
Ms. Altman, I want to say that all of us here who are in the sound of your voice should appreciate the facts as you have related them. And if they want to verify those facts, if they buy your book, they can spend as much time as they like trying to refute them. My question to you is this. What is your opinion as to why the Republican Party, for at least the last 30 years, has made a very special and concerted effort to misrepresent the facts that they know better than anyone? Try to convince America that you're better off taking a dispensation on a monthly basis that you can invest in Wall Street when it comes to your Social Security benefits, as well as denigrate Medicare. What is your thought as to why they are still so determined to lie and misrepresent about this?
I have many opinions on that. And let me first say, I did not plant that question, but thank you for the the plug. And in fact, if you don't want to spend the money, I hope it's in libraries, but the trustees report is actually online at the Social Security Administration website, and you can find all of that information there. My first book is The Battle for Social Security. And what it shows is that starting even before Social Security was enacted, there was a small moneyed group that opposed Social Security. And in fact, in 1936, even before any money had been collected, the law was enacted in August of 1935, but it was a hot issue in the 1936 election. Alf Landon, the Republican presidential nominee, called it a hoax on working men, said you'll pay and pay, you'll never see a penny in benefits. In fact, he was the first one to call the reserves worthless IOUs. George Bush didn't come up with that. That was Alf Landon back in 1936. And in fact, and this you can hear this online, there was, leading up to the election, the Republican National Committee sent out flyers, very official looking, like they were coming from the Social Security Board, sent them out to employers all around the country, and they put up that were put into the pay envelopes of workers that said, be careful how you vote, because if you vote wrong, you're going to have to pay an additional, at that point it was 1%, to Social Security, and you may never see the money again. It's just going to be taken from you. It's a hoax. There were reports coming into the Democrats that people were throwing down their signs, and they were really upset. That was so bad that President Franklin Roosevelt, on the Friday before the election, October 31, went to Madison Square Garden and delivered a speech. And I urge all of you, I sometimes play it, but I urge all of you to listen to it. But what he said, he went through it point by point, that this is insurance and so forth. But the line that I thought really said it all was, he said, it's an old strategy of tyrants to get their victims to do their dirty work for them. And it was then, again, moneyed interests that were trying to turn workers against Social Security. And what's going on with the Republicans, some of it is ideological, that they think this is not an appropriate role of government, and that's perfectly fine. Let's have a debate on that. We've debated that over the years, but they tried that in 1936, they lost. They tried it in 1940, they lost. They've tried it every election cycle through the early 70s, and it lost. But then something different happened. They changed their tactic, and they started talking about, oh, it's a wonderful program, but it won't be there for you. And that's what you hear Jeb Bush saying. We've got to phase it out. We've got to cut this program. And the reality is that those are lies, as you say. The fact is that we can afford these programs. It's a question of choice and values. There is a small, Eisenhower called them a small splinter group that doesn't support the program, but the American people do. And if we make sure our voices are heard in this upcoming election, and we don't let people get away with platitudes or misinformation and use that 6% of GDP, then I think the American people, as they always have, will prevail this time too. Thank you so much.
Today we've been enjoying a City Club of Friday Forum featuring Nancy J. Altman, co-founder of Social Security Works. Thank you, Ms. Altman. Ladies and gentlemen, our forum is now adjourned.